The city of Atlanta has always been a place of dreams and contradictions. Bright skyscrapers tower above streets lined with small shops, food vendors, and families who carry stories older than the city itself. And among the million faces that rush through its streets every day, very few knew the story of a woman who had risen from nothing to build everything. Her name was Eleanor Johnson. To the world, she was a billionaire businesswoman, the founder of multiple companies, and one of the wealthiest black women in America. But to those who truly knew her, Eleanor was far more than a figure of wealth. She was a living testimony to struggle, resilience, and faith. Eleanor had not been born into privilege. Far from it. She was raised in a small two-bedroom house on the south side of Atlanta. Her father was a factory worker who lost his job when she was still a child. Her mother cleaned houses to keep food on the table. And Eleanor, the eldest of 3 children, often carried the weight of responsibilities much too heavy for a little girl. She remembered standing in grocery lines, clutching food stamps while other children whispered behind her back. She remembered the nights when the lights went out because her family couldn't pay the bill. And she remembered, most of all, the countless moments when she was reminded, by neighbors, teachers, and strangers, that she was black, poor, and female, and that society expected nothing of her. But Eleanor carried a quiet fire in her heart. She was brilliant, hardworking, and determined not to be defined by the limits others placed on her. In high school, she excelled in math and science, but was told by a counselor, "Girls like you don't go far in business. Maybe aim for something simpler." Eleanor never forgot those words, not because she believed them, but because they fueled her to prove them wrong. By the time she was 25, she had already started her first small business, a real estate agency. No bank wanted to lend to her. She was rejected by investors who laughed at the idea of a young black woman buying, selling, and managing properties. But Eleanor refused to bow. She worked 2 jobs, saved every dollar, and bought her first property with nothing but courage and sacrifice. One deal led to another. Slowly, painfully, her name began to rise. She was known not for flashy speeches or loud appearances, but for her integrity and vision. Every building she bought, every project she launched, she tied it back to her community. For Eleanor, wealth was not just numbers in a bank account. It was opportunity, dignity, and hope. Over the years, her empire grew beyond real estate. She invested in technology, education, and small businesses run by people who, like her, were once told they didn't belong. She became a mentor, a leader, and a quiet force in Atlanta's progress. And yet, if you saw her on the street, you might not recognize her. Eleanor was not the type to wear designer gowns or travel with a dozen bodyguards. She dressed simply, preferred modest cars, and often walked the city without anyone knowing who she was. That humility was part of her strength. It was also the reason why, on one particular morning, an ordinary misunderstanding would turn into an extraordinary lesson, one that shook an entire office and left a mark on everyone who witnessed it. But to understand that moment, you must first understand the woman who walked into it. A woman who had carried the weight of discrimination all her life. A woman who had built an empire brick by brick, in a world that never believed she could. A woman whose quiet dignity would soon speak louder than all the insults thrown her way. Her name was Eleanor Johnson. And this is her story. Atlanta was buzzing with excitement, not because of a concert or a political rally, but because whispers had spread through the city about Eleanor Johnson's newest venture. After years of leading companies that reshaped communities, she had decided to build something different, something bold. It wasn't just another corporate office tower. It was a business hub, a place where innovation and opportunity could live under one roof. A space where young entrepreneurs could find mentorship, where new companies could find roots, and where ideas could be transformed into futures. For Eleanor, this wasn't about adding another feather to her crown of success. It was about legacy. She had often said, "Success isn't success if it dies with you. True success is what you leave behind for others." She poured her heart into this project. Every detail, from the architecture of the glass-walled tower to the training programs that would run inside, had her touch. The location itself was symbolic. A once-neglected block of downtown Atlanta, now transformed into a shining monument of possibility. Yet despite her influence, Eleanor had never made her identity the center of attention. She rarely attended ribbon cuttings, rarely allowed her face to dominate headlines. The city had grown used to her quiet leadership, her work speaking louder than her name. That decision, however, created a strange reality. Many of the very employees she hired to run the new hub had never seen her. They knew of her reputation, her story, her fortune. They admired the myth, but not the woman. And so the staff, brilliant, hand-picked, and highly qualified, prepared for the opening day with anticipation. There was chatter in every corner of the building. "Have you met her?" "No, but I hear she's a genius in business. I wonder what she looks like. Whoever she is, she must be larger than life." The truth, of course, was far more complex. Eleanor was larger than life, but not in the way they imagined. She wasn't a celebrity with flashing diamonds and designer suits. She wasn't a tycoon with arrogance carved into her voice. She was Eleanor Johnson. Simple, grounded, and very much human. And that morning, as the staff filed into their brand-new offices, Eleanor decided something unusual. She chose to arrive alone. No assistants, no security, no announcement. She wanted to see the place with her own eyes, as a regular person, before stepping into it as the owner. She wore a plain navy dress, a pair of low-heeled shoes she had owned for years. Her hair, streaked with strands of silver, to anyone passing by, she looked like an ordinary woman in her 50s, walking with quiet confidence. There was no chauffeur waiting at the curb. Eleanor parked her own car a block away and strolled toward the gleaming tower that now bore her name on the deeds and contracts, but not yet on the hearts of the people inside. The glass doors glistened in the morning sun. Inside, laughter and chatter filled the air as employees gathered for what they believed would be their first meeting with the legendary owner. Some imagined a powerful entrance, complete with photographers and applause. But what happened next would be something no one inside those walls could have predicted. Because as Eleanor reached for the entrance door, history, cruel and familiar, came knocking again. This time, not in the form of a banker refusing her loan, not in the form of a teacher dismissing her dreams, but in the form of a security guard who looked at her skin, her clothes, and her age, and decided she didn't belong. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric. Employees hurried between polished hallways, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The scent of fresh paint and new furniture still lingered in the air, blending with the aroma of coffee brewing in the staff lounge. It was the first day, the day every worker, from interns to executives, had been waiting for. The new office hub was unlike any workplace they had seen before. Its wide glass windows looked out over downtown Atlanta, and the sleek, modern design reflected the ambition of the project itself. Everyone wanted to impress. Everyone wanted to be noticed. The staff whispered among themselves about the moment they would finally meet the owner. Some imagined a dramatic entrance, a convoy of black cars pulling up, bodyguards opening the door for a woman draped in expensive clothing. Others thought she might arrive with a team of photographers and news cameras. One executive, adjusting his tie, laughed and said, "Whoever she is, she'll know right away that this is a serious place. We don't entertain nonsense here." Another replied with a smirk, "Well, she must be one of those billionaire types who thinks she can run everything from the shadows. Let's see if she's as sharp as they say." As these conversations carried on, no one knew that Eleanor Johnson herself was already outside, walking toward the entrance. No spotlight, No applause. Just a woman in her 50s with a plain navy dress, clutching a leather bag that had seen years of use. Meanwhile, at the security desk near the main entrance, 2 guards stood watch. They were new hires, proud of their positions, but untested. Their job was simple: keep order, protect the building, and ensure no one suspicious gained access. When Eleanor reached the front steps, her heart beat with quiet pride. This was her creation, her vision turned into reality. She reached for the glass door, ready to step inside, ready to finally meet the people she had chosen to carry her dream forward. But before she could cross the threshold, a hand shot out in front of her. "Ma'am, hold on," the security guard said firmly. "This is private property. Employees only." Eleanor blinked, surprised. "I understand," she said calmly. "That's why I'm here." The second guard interrupted, his tone sharper. "We don't allow visitors without clearance. You'll have to leave." Eleanor's lips parted slightly, caught between disbelief and patience. "I think you may be mistaken," she said gently. "I belong here." The first guard chuckled under his breath. "Sure you do. Everyone who wanders by says the same thing. But this isn't a shelter or a library. This is a private office. You can't just walk in." Eleanor straightened her posture. She had dealt with prejudice all her life. Still, a part of her thought, not here. Not today. Not at the building I built with my own hands. She tried again, her voice calm but steady. "I'm not just any visitor. I am." But before she could finish, the second guard placed his hand on her shoulder and nudged her back from the door. "Enough, ma'am. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Move along." Her breath caught in her throat. She had been pushed away from the very place that was hers. At that moment, the laughter and excitement inside the building felt like a cruel contrast to the humiliation happening just a few feet away. The staff waited eagerly for their first glimpse of their powerful owner, unaware that she was already outside, being denied entry to her own empire. And within minutes, this small act of arrogance was about to ignite a storm that none of them would ever forget. Eleanor stood outside the towering glass doors of her own building, her reflection staring back at her from the polished surface. Behind that glass, she could see shadows of employees moving about, smiling, preparing for the day. Her day. But she was still on the sidewalk. Blocked, pushed back, treated like an intruder. The first guard crossed his arms, his expression dripping with impatience. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but you can't be standing here. This place is for employees only. If you want to apply for a job, the HR office isn't even in this building." The second guard smirked and added, "Besides, we know who works here, and you definitely don't look like one of them." Eleanor took a slow breath. Her instinct was to correct them, to tell them the truth. But the way their eyes scanned her clothes, the way their tone hardened with each word, she recognized that familiar wall. It wasn't about protocol. It wasn't about procedure. It was about assumption. Assumption built on the color of her skin. Assumption built on the simplicity of her dress. Assumption that she did not belong. "I am not here to apply for a job," she said firmly, meeting their gaze. "I am the owner of this building. This company is mine." The guards exchanged looks, not of respect, but of amusement. The first guard burst out laughing. "The owner? Of this place? That's a good one. You really expect us to believe that?" The second guard shook his head, chuckling. "Lady, billionaires don't walk around in cheap dresses carrying old handbags. Stop wasting our time." For a moment, Eleanor felt the sting deep in her chest. Not because she needed their validation. She had long surpassed the need to prove her worth to strangers, but because this was the very thing she had fought her whole life to overcome. Disrespect, disbelief, dismissal. And now, even after decades of success, she was still being shoved aside, simply because of how she looked. She straightened her shoulders. Her voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the morning air. You are making a mistake. Call your supervisors. Call whoever you need. But I am not moving from this spot. The first guard rolled his eyes and picked up his radio. Control, we got a situation at the front door. Some woman is claiming she owns the place. Can we get one of the execs down here? Within minutes, the message spread through the building like wildfire. Executives, who had been preparing to greet their mysterious new employer, now rushed to the lobby to deal with what they assumed was a disturbance. And when they arrived, their eyes landed on Eleanor. There she was, a black woman in her 50s, standing firm despite the mocking grins around her. No flashy jewelry, no corporate uniform, no entourage, just quiet dignity. The executives paused. Then one of them, a tall man with a crisp suit and sharper tongue, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said with a polite but patronizing smile. "This is private property. You can't be loitering here. Now, you say you're the owner." Eleanor nodded once. "Yes, this building, this company. All of it belongs to me." The group of executives exchanged glances before laughter broke out. Genuine, unrestrained laughter. The tall man smirked. "Lady, do you really expect us to believe that? Do you have any idea whose office this is? This isn't some small-time shop. This is a billion-dollar venture." Eleanor's eyes didn't waver. "I know exactly what it is. I built it." But her words only fueled their arrogance. One executive muttered under his breath, "She's delusional." Another chuckled, "Probably trying to scam her way in." And just like that, the very people hired to serve her vision dismissed her humanity. They saw not the empire she had built, but only the skin she was in. They had no idea the storm that was about to hit them. The lobby of the building, which had been filled with polished marble, glass walls, and the soft hum of morning activity, now became the stage for an ugly scene. The executives, dressed in sharp suits and expensive watches, stood in a semicircle around Eleanor. Their smiles were not welcoming. Their laughter was not kind. To them, she was not the visionary who had built their future. She was just a stranger, an inconvenience, a woman who did not look the part. One of them, a woman in a gray blazer with eyes that seemed to size Eleanor up like a specimen, crossed her arms. "So let me get this straight," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "You're trying to tell us that you own this building? That you are the billionaire everyone's been waiting to meet?" Eleanor's gaze did not falter. "That is exactly what I am saying." The woman smirked, tilting her head. "Right? And I suppose next you'll tell us you built half the city too." The laughter that followed was sharp, echoing off the glass walls. Another executive, a man with slicked back hair, shook his head in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. She's obviously just looking for attention. Someone call the police before this gets out of hand." For a brief moment, Eleanor's chest tightened. She thought of the years she had spent proving herself in boardrooms, convincing skeptical bankers to take a chance on her, fighting for contracts that others had been handed without question. She thought of how many times she had been told no, not because of her ability, but because of her identity. And here she was again, even with all she had built, even with all she had achieved. She was still being told she did not belong. Eleanor closed her eyes for a second, then opened them with a calm that unsettled the room. Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of authority that could not be ignored. "I will give you one chance," she said evenly. "Call my CEO. He knows me. He will confirm everything I have told you. I will give you exactly 10 minutes. If he is not here by then, every one of you will regret this moment." The executives froze for a heartbeat, then erupted into laughter again. 10 minutes? One of them scoffed. "Or what? Lady, you're out of your mind," another sneered. The tall man leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "And who exactly is this mysterious CEO you're talking about? Some imaginary friend of yours?" But Eleanor didn't flinch. Her tone did not rise, her face did not crack. She simply repeated, 10 minutes. The guards and executives chuckled among themselves, shaking their heads. To them, it was a performance, a scene they would later recount as a joke. But time, steady and unforgiving, had already begun to count down. And as the seconds ticked away, the very arrogance that filled the lobby would soon be shattered by a truth so powerful that none of them would ever forget it. The marble clock in the lobby ticked steadily, each second louder than the last. To Eleanor, the sound was a reminder of how close she was to ending this humiliation. To the executives, it was little more than background noise, drowned out by their own laughter and arrogance. The tall man in the navy suit leaned against the reception desk, smirking. "So let me get this straight. We're supposed to stand here and wait 10 minutes because you say your CEO is going to show up? And when he does what, he's going to call you his boss?" His words were followed by a round of chuckles. The security guards grinned, as if this were the most entertainment they had had in weeks. Eleanor stood still, hands folded in front of her. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply waited, her silence louder than their mockery. Minutes passed. At first, the staff found it amusing. But slowly, the mood began to shift. Her composure was unsettling. Her calmness didn't match the picture of a woman desperate to deceive. Still, they tried to cover their unease with taunts. One executive muttered, "She's bluffing. No CEO is coming." Another added, "If she's really the owner, why wouldn't she just walk in with him this morning?" But Eleanor did not move. Her voice, steady as a heartbeat, broke the tension. 5 minutes left. The smirk on the tall man's face faltered, just for a second. He cleared his throat and laughed again, louder this time, trying to drown out the creeping doubt. 5 minutes, he mocked. "Oh, I'm shaking." The second hand ticked on. Inside the office spaces above, employees continued their chatter, unaware that history was being written in the lobby below, unaware that their careers, their futures, hung by a thread that grew thinner with each passing second. Then, at exactly the 10th minute, the glass doors swung open. A man in his early 40s stepped inside, walking with quiet authority. His presence commanded respect instantly. He was known to everyone there, the CEO of the new hub, the man Eleanor had entrusted with overseeing this project. The executives straightened their jackets, their mocking grins replaced by polished smiles. The guards immediately moved aside, nodding in deference. "Sir," the tall man said eagerly, "we've had a bit of a situation. This woman here." But before he could finish, the CEO's eyes locked onto Eleanor. His expression softened, his steps quickened, and then, in front of everyone, he bowed his head. "Madam Johnson," he said with deep respect, "my apologies for keeping you waiting." The room froze, the executives' faces drained of color. The guards blinked in disbelief. The tall man's mouth opened, but no words came out. The CEO turned, his gaze cold as steel as he faced them. "Do you fools have any idea who you've been mocking? Do you know whose building this is? This woman is your employer. The very reason you even have a job today. And you dared to treat her with disrespect." Silence crashed over the lobby like a tidal wave. And for the first time, the staff realized that in trying to measure her worth by her skin, her age, or her clothes, they had measured themselves unworthy instead. The air in the lobby felt heavy, as though the polished glass walls themselves were holding their breath. Moments ago, the executives had stood tall, their laughter bouncing arrogantly through the hall. But now, their faces were pale, their eyes darting nervously between the CEO and the woman they had ridiculed. Eleanor remained silent. She did not need to speak. Her calm presence was louder than their excuses, her dignity sharper than their shame. The CEO, however, did not stay silent. His voice rang through the room with an authority that left no space for argument. "You mocked her. You dismissed her. You put your hands on her," he said, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "And all the while, you didn't realize you were humiliating the very person who built this empire with her own hands." One of the executives stammered, her words tumbling over each other. "We didn't know. She never said who she was." The CEO cut her off. "She didn't have to say. You should have treated her with respect, regardless. Respect is not owed to a title or a bank account or a suit and tie. It is owed to every human being that walks through these doors. And you failed. All of you." The tall man, who only minutes before had mocked Eleanor the loudest, swallowed hard and tried to step forward. His voice trembled. "Madam Johnson, I apologize. Truly. We didn't mean." Eleanor's gaze finally moved, fixing on him. Her eyes were calm, but behind them was a lifetime of memories, of every time she had been told she didn't belong, of every door that had been slammed in her face. "You didn't mean?" she repeated softly. "Or you didn't care?" Her question hung in the air like a blade. The man lowered his head, unable to answer. The other executives shifted uneasily, their polished confidence crumbling into silence. The guards, who had shoved Eleanor back only moments ago, now stood stiff, their eyes wide with regret. And then Eleanor spoke again, not in anger, but with a quiet authority that made every word pierce their souls. "All my life, I have been told I was not enough, not the right color, not the right gender, not the right face for success. And yet I built all of this, brick by brick, deal by deal, sacrifice by sacrifice. I never asked for applause. I never demanded recognition. But I will not, and I repeat, will not tolerate disrespect in my own house." The words echoed. Some of the staff visibly flinched, as though each syllable struck them across the face. The CEO bowed his head slightly, adding in a low, firm voice, "Her decision will be final. Pray that it is merciful." In that moment, the executives and guards understood. The ground beneath them felt as though it had disappeared. Their power, their pride, their certainty, all shattered in the span of 10 minutes. And yet, Eleanor stood there, still as stone, her quiet dignity radiating more power than their entire chorus of arrogance ever had. What came next would seal their fate. The silence in the lobby stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Every staff member stood frozen, waiting for a verdict they already feared. Eleanor drew a breath, slow and steady, and stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor, each sound echoing like a gavel striking judgment. She stopped in the center of the room, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the people who had mocked her, touched her, dismissed her. "You wanted to know who I am," she began, her voice calm but unshakable. "I am Eleanor Johnson, the founder, the builder, the sole owner of this empire. Every office you see, every paycheck you earn, every opportunity you cling to, it exists because I refused to quit when the world told me I had no place." The staff lowered their eyes, unable to meet her gaze. "I came here today not as a billionaire, not as some untouchable figure, but as a woman who wanted to share in the joy of a new beginning. And what did I receive? Mockery, disrespect, violence." Her voice tightened, but she did not shout. "Not because of what I said, not because of what I did, but because of the color of my skin." A murmur of shame rippled through the hall. She paused, her words heavy in the stillness. "Let me make this clear. Racism has no place in my company. Arrogance has no place in my company. Disrespect has no place in my company. And none of you have a place in my company." Gasps broke out. Some of the staff pleaded instantly. "Please, Madam Johnson, give us another chance. We didn't mean. It was a mistake." But Eleanor shook her head slowly. Her eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "Some mistakes can be corrected. Others must be remembered. This will be remembered." The CEO stepped forward, clipboard in hand. His expression was hard. "You heard her. Pack your things. Effective immediately, your employment here is over." The executives looked as though the ground had vanished beneath their feet. Guards who had pushed Eleanor at the entrance stared at one another in horror. Some tried to kneel, to beg, but Eleanor's calm hand lifted, silencing them. "It is too late," she said simply. For a long moment no one moved, and then, slowly, shamefully, they began to file out, their once proud footsteps dragging across the floor. The sound of their departure echoed like a funeral march. When the last of them had gone, the room was still again. The air, once heavy with arrogance, now felt cleansed. Eleanor turned to the CEO. "Tomorrow we will rebuild the staff. We will find people who understand respect, who understand humanity, who will work not just for a paycheck but for a vision. And this time I want every single person in this building to know exactly who they are working for." The CEO nodded firmly. "Yes, Madam Johnson, it will be done." Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders easing. She walked slowly to the glass doors, looking out at the city skyline. For a moment, her reflection looked back at her. A woman who had faced every kind of storm and still stood unbroken. And as she pushed open the doors and stepped out into the sunlight, her voice carried softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Respect is not a privilege. It is a right, and no one, no matter their title, their color, or their pride, should ever forget that." The doors closed behind her, sealing the end of a chapter not only in her company's history, but in the lives of everyone who had dared to underestimate her. And so, Eleanor Johnson walked forward, still simple, still powerful, still unstoppable.